in the light, but I can't change the past tonight. Faded maps and broken lines, every road leads back in time, through the echoes, through the rain, still calling out your name. Find a road I used to know. Till then I drive, till then I roam, trying to find my way back home. Faded maps and broken lines, every road leads back in time, through the echoes, through the rain, still calling out your name. Oh, calling out your name. Maybe one day I'll let go, find a road I used to know. Till then I drive, till then I roam, trying to find my way back home.
Hello, God's Way. Hello.
Yes, hello, I'm audible.
Yeah.
I hope you can hear me.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I can hear you. I think we can start the preliminaries of introductions and some few things. The things to do or the rules it said. Then we can get into it. I think we have just about 2 minutes to get started.
Sure. Can you go ahead?
Yeah. As way of just welcoming everyone. We are yet to start. This is just to give us some feeling that you are not left behind, or you are not left just here by yourself. We are here, and we'll be kickstarting in the next 1 minute. According to my clock, it's 4:57, and we are to start at 5. And so, by way of just welcoming you, all those who are already here, some people have been on the call for quite some time now, and we appreciate your time being spent with us. Internet Society Online Special Interest Group. Before we kickstart properly, I would want us to interact in the chat. Let's interact in the chat. Indicate where you are joining us from. I can already see Anna saying Armenia. Great to have you. And Armenia chapter ISOC. Thank you, Anna. Just drop in the chat where you are joining us from. This call or this webinar was planned to be done in October. However, we just left October, and as part of cyber security awareness period, that's why we are having this. It's great to see friends from Ghana, Nigeria, India. Keep dropping in the chat. And I would also want you to hit a friend, a colleague who may have registered but has not joined, that, hey, you need not to miss a second of this webinar, because it's going to be very informative and there's a lot to take away from. So like I was saying, this webinar is being organized by the ISOC Online Safety Special Interest Group. We are dedicated to promoting and advocating for a safer and more secure online environment for everyone. I mean, everyone, everywhere. And our core principles that underlines our mandate includes digital rights, privacy, inclusivity, and a whole lot, considering the gigantic nature of the internet as it keeps evolving and things become new every time. There are things coming up that it sometimes feel it's hard to catch up with the internet at large. And so, yes, I'm really honored to be the moderator or facilitator for today's webinar. It's exactly 5:02. For those who are just joining us, please simply join us, drop in the chat where you are joining us from. So as a way of welcoming everyone, good evening from my end here in Tamale, Ghana. Good afternoon, good morning, good night, or whatever time it may be at your end, and a special welcome to you to this program hosted by Internet Society Online Safety Special Interest Group. My name is Lavish Mawena Mensa, and I am pleased to be moderating today's discussion. We are going to tweak the webinar briefly, I mean a little, not like the usual presentation format, but kind of a discussion. And so we encourage you to drop your questions because we will be having them as and when they drop in. We will be putting them out there. So we are gathered here at a very important moment in the evolution of online safety and digital governance. Around the world, there is a growing recognition that the challenges of harmful content, safety risk, and platform accountability cannot be solved by individual companies or countries acting alone. We agree that this is a shared responsibility. And so what we need are shared, credible, internationally recognized standards that allow us to build a safer digital ecosystem, one that protects users and preserves the open global nature of the internet. And that's exactly what brings us here today. If you looked at the flyer that invited you, our focus is on safe framework. It is a first of a kind tool model for digital trust and safety that has now progressed into a formal international standard under the International Standard Organization in collaboration with the International Electrotechnical Commission. I can see your hand. Okay. And these two organizations develop standards for technology, as some of us might know, we all do know. So we are going to talk about this. And the international standard is under ISO/IEC 25389. This marks a major shift in how online safety can be structured, not just as a policy debate or compliance exercise, but as a standards-based practice, similar to cybersecurity and data protection. So to help us understand what this means in practice for platforms, for regulators, for the wide internet community, we are being joined by David Slovan, who is the Executive Director of the Digital Trust and Safety Partnership, DTSP, and a key leader behind the Safe Frameworks development. So David would walk us through how the standard emerged and what it contains, why it matters, and so on and so forth. And so thank you so much once again for being here. I'm still looking at the chat. If you haven't dropped where you are joining us from, kindly do so. And then also be dropping your questions as and when you have them. We would be chipping them as we move along. Permit me to jump quickly and bring David here. I guess David is on the call. Godsway, can you help me pin David and myself?
Yes.
Yes, great.
Great. Thank you, Lavish. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here with you to talk about the SAFE framework and international standards for online safety. The Internet Society and its special interest groups are such an important constituency when it comes to keeping the internet open and safe, and we'll talk a lot about that today. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation, and I will have some slides that I may bring up at different times. But like Lavish said, we don't want to be boring, and so we're going to structure this as a conversation, and we want to involve all of you in that conversation and learn from you, as well as hopefully help you learn some things about these new developments and hopefully how that you can use them in your work. So it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So right into the game. Tell us a little about yourself and what you've done, what you're doing, and what you hope to achieve in the internet ecosystem.
Sure. Yeah. So maybe just a little bit about me by way of some introduction. I'm David Sullivan. I'm based in Boulder, Colorado, in the Western USA. So it's 10 a.m. For me right now. I am someone who has spent about the last 15 years really working on the internet, digital rights, and trust and safety. Before that, my career was really started in humanitarian assistance, international development, and human rights advocacy, and spent a lot of time, including working quite a bit on the African continent in Central Africa and in Liberia. And I started working with technology companies, first looking at the human rights impacts of supply chains for hardware, and in particular, critical minerals that were being used in all kinds of the hardware we use to connect with each other these days, and how those were impacting conflict on the ground in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So that was how I started to work with technology companies. And then I was spent about 10 years at the Global Network Initiative, which brings together technology companies with human rights organizations and academics and investors in a multi-stakeholder structure to work on things like freedom of expression and privacy and dealing with government demands to remove content or hand over user data, or to shut down the internet and communications networks in different places around the world. That work brought me to recognize the importance of how companies deal with all of the kinds of challenging user-generated content and user behavior that is a consequence of these technologies that allow us to connect. That we can use them for good, but they will be used to hurt people. And the importance of bringing companies together to think about how they can better explain what they do and improve how they do it. And that's what brought us to the idea of standards in this field that online safety, trust and safety. It has many different names depending on who you talk to.
Okay, great.
But
Thank
we all
you.
mean the same
So
thing.
let's start with the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Why standards? Why standards?
Yeah. So I think ultimately the challenge here is when it comes to um, online activity and communication, we're talking about human expression. And we don't want to standardize human expression, right? We want different types of digital products and services with different purposes to be able to enable all different kinds of online behavior. It may be an online marketplace over here. It may be a messaging service over there. It might be social media. It could be online dating. It could be AI chatbots. These are all different kinds of services, and because we tend to focus, and when I say we, I mean the entire world, and the global, interconnected nature of the internet, that we focus on the harms that can arise, whether that is something like threats to the safety of children, whether it comes to the use of the internet by terrorist or violent extremist organizations. We tend to focus on these types of harms and say, oh, we need to do something about that. Um, but actually, we don't know what the new challenge is going to be that's around the corner, as especially with technology is developing as fast as it is. So how can we make sure that we raise the floor for what is expected of companies in this space without constraining people's ability to exercise their fundamental human rights, including that right to freedom of expression? And so the approach here is that we can draw on the proven model of international standards as a way of achieving consensus around challenging issues so we can reduce fragmentation, reduce confusion, facilitate that global interoperable internet, but standardize around the practices that are used for trust and safety instead of what type of content should be allowed.
Okay, great. So we mentioned DTSP.
Yeah.
I think you've already given us prelims about how it began, but what was the gap that was identified by Digital Trust and Safety Partnership set out to fill? I mean, what was that gap?
Yeah. And so maybe here I will actually just share a slide or two.
Sure.
And let me just, one moment. Hang on for just a second.
Sure. While you do that, we welcome you all once again. For those who are just joining us, please feel free to comment in the chat right away. Your questions, we will be pulling them up, as well as also where you are joining us from. It will be great to have that.
Okay.
So David, over to you. Go ahead.
Yeah, is that showing the slides correctly?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
it is.
Excellent. Yeah. So maybe just a little bit. So the Digital Trust and Safety Partnership was formed in early 2021, and it brings together companies of all sizes, from big tech to middle tech to little tech, who provide have some sort of product or service for which they are doing what's called trust and safety. And the idea is to develop best practices, ways of assessing the implementation of those practices, and now international standards for this field of trust and safety, modeled on the successful, I think, maturing of other fields within technology, particularly security and privacy, where you have very robust frameworks of international standards, assessments, and compliance functions that don't solve, by any stretch of the imagination, all of the challenges when it comes to security or privacy, but they still manage to reduce the risk and provide a framework that is global and interoperable. We have this is our membership. I actually need to update this slide because we now have also just welcomed Snap to the partnership. But you can see that our members range from some of the very biggest companies to much smaller companies, and that there's very different business models, very different services. So you can see that all different types of risks and threats, but agreement again on the practices. That's a little bit about DTSP. What I would say in terms of the gap that we wanted to fill, and I was not at the organization for its founding, but it came on as the first executive director a few months thereafter. The idea is that perhaps for too long there had not been practitioners responsible for online safety inside of companies like this had not come together to define what best practices should be. And we can talk a little bit about why that was the case. But I think that there's partly this work is often done behind the scenes. People do not want to provide information that would allow bad actors to get around the kind of practices we use for online safety. But that led to this being a kind of a world that was not very well understood outside of companies, and where companies were not really working together to share and identify practices. And that's a bit of an exaggeration, because there's many examples we can talk about how that's been done over the last 10 to 15 years. But there was a need to formalize and say, this is what we think good looks like. These are the overarching categories and framework, and that's the gap that we have been trying to fill.
Okay. Great to hear that. So we are talking about ISO, that is International Standard Organization, and then the IEC, and then we just want to, can you help us demystify the standards, the
Yes.
words mean for us? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just pull this back up. And um, international standards really have been around over the past century. And you have, and actually, let me go back here one sec. Why do we have international standards there? The idea is really to improve the quality and reduce fragmentation of all different types of products and services and organizations. And this is in turn something that helps to facilitate international trade. International standards, whether developed by ISO, IEC, or the ITU, have special status within the World Trade Organization, and are used by governments as part of both how they are regulating, as well as how they procure different goods and services. And so these standards, for example, ISO 27001, I'm sure many people will be familiar with. That's the management system standard for information security, the main standard for InfoSec and cybersecurity. That standard is either recommended or required for different sectors by, I think, around 14 different governments, as well as the European Union. So that's an example of how standards can be used to reduce fragmentation and increase coherence. Standards, there are pros and cons, and there's differences between these formal international standards bodies and how other standards consortia work, including standards developed by folks like the World Wide Web Consortium or the Internet Engineering Task Force. These formal standards, they are often expensive. They often require paying hundreds of Swiss francs to ISO to purchase individual user licenses to access the standards. ISO and IEC work through a sort of government model where ISO is composed of participants from member states, sort of national standards bodies. These are often government agencies who are responsible for participating, and each state gets a vote. So who gets to participate in the making of standards is not as open in these as it is in some other situations. So you have ISO and IEC usually, and those two organizations actually work together for information technology standards through something called Joint Technical Committee 1. So ISO, IEC, JTC 1 is the umbrella organization that's responsible for all information technology standards, from cybersecurity to cloud computing to AI. And it's through JTC 1 that our standard, the SAFE framework, ISO IEC 25389, has been published as a standard.
Okay, permit me to bring up a question from the chat.
Yeah.
I mean, it actually affirms your point of saying that it's expensive. And so Nicholas is saying some governments say that cybersecurity is costly, but all these protocols are for free. Or are they biased by Azure or Microsoft? Because if you want better security, you pay more to the companies, but the algorithm and protocols are actually free. How do you deal with this?
So I can't speak to how this works in other areas, but I do know that yeah, it can be very expensive, and definitely different governments with their own I would say priorities participate in standards looking to advance their industries, their interests. So this is it's a competitive environment. We actually don't think at the DTSP that we should be like competing like that around things like safety. What we have done is make because DTSP has made the SAFE framework available on our website, and you can use the QR code in the corner of all the slides, and we can also drop the link in the chat. Available at no cost. Our framework also is made available by ISO for free. You can get it from the ISO website without having to pay anything. And I think this is part of our effort is to really broadly deploy something which is not a technical standard, but which is a framework. So I think, especially in the internet context, we think about standards as being technical standards, very precise specifications, code, that sort of thing. Um, our standard is not that. It's not a technical standard. It is a framework. It is a way of thinking about what trust and safety entails and how it works. So I would just want to reinforce that a little bit.
Okay, okay. Let's come back to the slide and
Yeah.
touch on the analog slide, the Baltimore fire. You used the powerful
Oh, yeah.
analogy, the 1960s. So if you could go to there, yeah.
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 Yeah. So, as I said, international standards really started back at the beginning of the 20th century, and that was really during that era of globalization, where things like trains and steamships and things like that were enabling much more travel and trade between different parts of the world. And so the first standards were really about making sure that weights and measurements were uniform, that you could count on a gallon of milk, being the same from one place to another. And uh, when it comes to safety and standards, so in 1904 in the United States, in the city of Baltimore, there was a fire, a big fire in the city. It was, I think, the first time that fire departments from other cities in the eastern USA were able to respond and to help with that fire because they were able to put their fire equipment on trains and get to the fire in time to help. But the hoses that they had did not match the hydrants in Baltimore. And so they couldn't attach the equipment and they were helpless and could not help to put out the fire. So this led in the US to the creation of standards for fire safety and building codes, which I think became the foundation for international standards that still deal with things like fire safety.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
Go ahead.
No. That's yeah. I'll
So
stop there.
I was just jumping in to say, so what's today's digital hydrant problem?
Yeah. So I think the when I think about it today, so as I mentioned, that there's been insufficient understanding of what the fire trucks, the hoses, the firefighters, protective equipment, what that all looks like and how that works
Yeah.
in the digital environment. And because there has not been a full understanding of it, I think there are misconceptions around how that work takes place that then have led to, in some cases, countries choosing to enact regulation in this field, which is important and necessary, but may not be based on what is going to do the best to help the digital firefighters, put out the fires around online safety. So I think by trying to standardize what trust and safety is through the SAFE framework, and we'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
I think that's the goal that we're trying to achieve here.
Okay, yeah. So right into it, as you have already initiated. You said it's not a technical thing, it's a framework. And so in simple terms, to someone who is hearing this for the first time, what is the SAFE framework?
Yeah. So the SAFE framework is really a framework of best practices for trust and safety. So these are the practices that companies are using to address what we call content and conduct related risks. It's the risks that are arising from user generated content and user behavior online, which is a little bit different from the risks we think about when it comes to things like cybersecurity. So there is the best practices, and then there is a assessment methodology to assess the implementation of those practices and to determine how mature those practices are and how to improve them. So the best practices framework is structured around 5 overarching commitments around product development, product governance, product enforcement, improvement, and transparency. So these are the overall categories, and they follow the product development lifecycle. And this is really about integrating safety into all of these different dimensions. So underneath each of these 5 pillars, we have set out about 35 specific examples of best practices. And the idea is that the companies who participate in our partnership or who choose to use and implement this standard, they commit to those 5 overarching commitments, and then they can use whatever combination of these specific best practices is appropriate to their product, their risks, all of that. Not all of these practices are going to be applicable to every single organization. So as an example, under product governance, facilitating community self-regulation is one of our best practices. And you can imagine that for a company like Reddit, who's one of our founding members, community self-regulation is very important. You can see the same with something like the Wikimedia Foundation and Wikipedia. When it comes to something like Microsoft Office, maybe there's less of a need for community self-regulation, right? So it's a flexible framework, and these practices are examples. They're not exhaustive. I think there's lots of other examples of best practices that we may want to include in future versions of this standard as it evolves over time. But we do, I think that the 5 commitments are encompassing. I don't, and this is one of the areas where I'm always looking for input and feedback. But I think that we can put everything in trust and safety into these 5 commitments. That's the framework, just to give some examples of the best practices. So as you can see here, they're kind of at bullet point length, and involve things like under governance, which is really all about, the whatever you call community standards, terms of service, community guidelines, whatever is the governance that determines what is acceptable or not acceptable for a given digital service, making sure that you're actually incorporating input from your users into how you develop that governance and into those policy rules. So that's an example. There's a few other examples here, but encourage folks to take a look at the framework, and of course, raise any questions you might have about them.
Okay, great. For those who just joined us, we are talking about international standards for digital safety, the SAFE framework. And so you just got into where Dave is telling us about the framework overview and then some best practices along the line. And so you've given us some real examples. I'd want us to now jump into the ISO ICE 25389, why it matters. Now that SAFE is becoming an ISO standard, what changes and why is that significant?
Yeah. So I should just before we get to that, because I do want to just briefly, and I won't go into detail on this, but if there are questions, I'm happy to answer them. So I described the best practices. The other part of the SAFE framework is the assessment methodology. So this is how we look at whether those practices are being used and how they can be improved. And so here, there's really just two things. One is the idea that we shouldn't be asking a small startup that has like a relatively, not very risky products that they offer to do the same kind of assessment that a big tech platform or a service that's very presents a lot of risks should do. So we have a process called tailoring to determine how deep that assessment needs to be, how detailed, what it needs to include. And then we have the five-step process for actually doing those assessments. So it's the practices and then it's how you assess and improve those practices over time that are the two pieces of um, this assessment of the standard and the framework. So why this matters? Let me just okay. So basically, uh, it's one thing for a group of companies to come together and say, okay, here's our framework, here's our practices, this is what we think is important. It's another thing for that framework to be recognized internationally by global by countries around the world as an international standard. And so this is something that we've been working on for quite a while. So I mentioned in 2021, we launched the organization and released the best practices. We also did a public consultation about the best practices and the assessment methodology and collected input from all around the world. Companies did initial self-assessments using that SAFE framework, and we published a report about that in 2022. And then we decided to make this move into international standards. And here, and let me just jump around for a second. So uh, international standards developed through ISO and IEC are usually developed through committees and working groups in which the national standards bodies work together to come up with consensus standards. That can be very slow and it can be very bureaucratic. And oftentimes it can take years and years and years for committees to reach consensus and to publish standards. And that time frame doesn't work very well for the internet. So actually, if you go back to like the late 1980s and early 1990s, the tech sector really started to create their own standards consortia to create especially technical standards because ISO and IEC were too slow. And so that's how you have thousands of different technical standards that have been developed through all different kinds of consortia and standards organizations that started to, I think, make ISO become almost irrelevant in the tech world. They were starting to worry about that. And so there was a recognition that ISO and the JTC1, the Joint Technical Committee for Information Technology, needed to figure out a process to recognize standards developed by other organizations that met criteria for things like cooperativeness and consensus and credibility. So they created something called publicly available specifications, where an organization can apply to be a publicly available specification submitter, meet certain criteria, and then submit their standards to be published by ISO and IEC. The organizations like the World Wide Web Consortium have used this process over the past decade plus, and this is the process that DTSP used as well. What this means is that, yeah, we submitted our standard. DTSP was approved to be a submitter of standards, and then we submitted our standard. It went for a vote by national standards bodies that concluded early this past year, and through that our standard has become ISO IEC 25389. So what does that mean? One, ISO standards have particular status especially with the World Trade Organization. They're not a technical barrier to trade, and so it's easier for governments to reference and recognize them in their regulations and procurement and things like that. The other thing is that our standard, the terms and definitions in it, which is one of the most important parts, are now added to the online browsing platform, which is a free resource where you can search all ISO standards to help, I think, get to better agreement on definitions of key terms so that we're not talking at cross purposes because we mean different things when we say the same word. And as I mentioned, the standard is available for free. And we at DTSP will be responsible for maintaining that standard, which means we will be reviewing it and evolving it looking ahead. So we'll be looking for a lot of public input and engagement with stakeholders as part of that process of review and evolution.
Okay, great. We would move on to clarifying some misconceptions. As some assume ISO equals compliance audits or mandates. And so what is ISO ICE 253 not?
Yeah. So basically, when we were preparing to submit this standard to be, for a vote from national standards bodies, there are two different, there are standards that contain requirements. And there are standards that contain recommendations, and some standards that contain both requirements and recommendations. If you have requirements, then you need to have some way of assessing whether whatever is being standardized conforms to those requirements. And that could take the form of testing a product in a laboratory. It could take the form of auditing a management system, whether that's for cybersecurity or other management systems, and having some sort of certification or compliance. But there are also lots of ISO standards that are just recommendations, that are just guidance. You cannot be certified as being in conformity with those standards, but those standards are nonetheless used very widely all around the world to align on practices and to help people implement and improve. And so a very good example of that is ISO 31000, which is the international standard for risk management. That standard, like the SAFE framework, only contains recommendations. You can't be certified against it, but you can use it, and people use it all the time, whether it's for benchmarking what they're doing against an international standard, whether it is for internal audit and those kinds of things, or whether it's part of complying with regulations around the world. And that is the same role that our standard seeks to play in this environment. One of the main questions I get is how can I be certified as using the SAFE framework? And so the short answer to that is that at this point, there is no certification, but it is something that we're thinking a lot about as we evolve the standard. Like I said, we'll be reviewing the standard going forward, and we'll be thinking about whether we should make some of the recommendations, some of the places where the standard says should, change those to say shall, and make those requirements, and whether to create some form of conformity assessment and certification. So hopefully that helps to clear that up a little bit.
Okay, great. Let's talk about regulatory interest and why our government and regulators like Australia, E-Safety Office, and the EU DSA referencing your work. But before we jump to that question, I want to look at how geopolitics is playing out in standardization. I mean, in that regard,
Yeah. So let me just stop sharing. Oh, one sec. Yeah. Yeah, we were talking about this when we were
Yeah,
planning this webinar, and I think one of the things that makes I think there's a reason why until we started this process, there were no international standards relating to user-generated content online. And I think the reason for that is because user-generated content is really about, as we've said, about people and expression, and that is both a human right in Article 19 of the ICCPR, but it is also an intensely political, contested, and contentious set of issues. And it's hard. And I don't think like I said, we don't want to standardize expression. But if we can standardize the practices that are used to address these kinds of issues, I think that may help to take some of the politics out of these debates. It can never completely get rid of them, right? But this is a way of thinking about how to do online safety better that does not uh, revolve around deciding what people can and cannot say online. It's saying that should be up to the companies and the services and what kind of service they offer and what kind of environment they want to provide. And of course, they also need to, kind of comply with laws around the world and also, uphold human rights. But the standardization is really around those practices, and I think that may help kind of at least put off to the side these very difficult questions around things like, what hate speech is or is not, which is something that I don't think, even the those everybody on this call would
yeah,
agree upon, right? We have very different views on those things. And when we start fighting about them, it stops us from making progress elsewhere. So we put that over and instead focus on what are the things that we can do. Where can we agree? So that's how we've approached this and how we've thought about the sort of, the geopolitics of some of these issues, which only get more complicated every day. Um, in terms of regulatory recognition, so there are online safety regulations in different parts of the world that either have made mention of DTSP and the SAFE framework, or where companies are using our framework to comply with regulatory requirements. Two examples of that. In Australia, the Online Safety Act in Australia has industry codes and standards for different types of services. That includes like a code for standards for search engines, standards for social media, standards for hosting providers, standards for different types of internet services. And many most of those codes and standards recognize DTSP as a source of international guidance and best practice in this field. Um, in the EU, the Digital Services Act, as folks may know, the Digital Services Act requires very large online platforms and search engines, which is online platforms and search engines with more than 45 million users in the European Union, to do a very extensive set of due diligence and transparency requirements, including risk assessments, mitigations, and audits. And there are some companies who have used the SAFE framework as part of their systemic risk assessments and for the Digital Services Act. So those are some examples of how companies can use our framework as part of complying with online safety regulations in different parts of the world. And we hope that this will help create more coherence when it comes to how we think about these issues, so that we don't have fragmented regulations that require different things that conflict with one another, and which ultimately, I think, put are very problematic for the free and open internet that everyone here, I think, wants to see.
Okay, great. There was another question in the chat from Nicholas. He says that some countries like Netherlands, German, France, and France have regulations around using TLS 1.3 for critical infrastructure, but other countries don't. The same happens partially with other, such as DNSEC, RPKI, US regulations. How to deploy worldwide? I mean, he's asking how is this being to be deployed worldwide, and also universal acceptance. Email, EAI, and then IDN. So he's just asking also how the two-way factor authentication and HTTP headers. Even we didn't touch, he didn't even touch on post-quantum crypto. I mean, he just indicating that there are a number of things to enumerate, and so deploying worldwide seems to be an issue.
Yeah, no, I think this shows that even so, in online safety, right, we see cybersecurity as one model to follow, that you can, through standardization and aligning regulations and laws and standards, get to more coherence and commonly accepted practices. But that honestly, that is so challenging when it comes to the actual implementation of technical standards, and how different companies, different governments, different jurisdictions, regulations, either don't interoperate or conflict with one another. So I am not familiar with the specifics of some of those technical standards and how the rollout of them is. We are far behind that when it comes to online safety. We're just trying to align around concepts and definitions, and the building blocks, to then be able to build out a more detailed and sophisticated framework. And there, I would just say, so I've shown how the DTSP safe framework has our commitments, then the examples of best practices. Um, I can envision a future where then you can go down a level and you can double click on those sort of bullet point length best practices to get to specific examples of implementation and resources and details, that would fill in the gaps. We don't want to be too prescriptive at this point because I don't think that we're yet at the point where we can say, well, if you want to do, let's say, um, uh, advanced detection and enforcement against certain types of harmful content online, like child sexual abuse material, that there's one technical solution to that. There are different types of um, uh, solutions. Folks are experimenting and working on different ways. People are incorporating AI, including LLMs, into how this works. So we're not in a place where I think we're mature enough to have very specific prescriptive standards, but there is a pathway to evolve from a shared framework to those standards over time.
Okay, great. So thank you so much, Dave, for how far we have come. Still calling on everyone. Thank you for your time for being here. If you have any question, please, you can drop it in the chat. So far, we had only two. We've read it out. If there are no other questions, I would put in maybe one or two more for David. This out of our plan, but then I know you are poised to addressing it, and you already touched on the fact that you were looking at the future into the best practices. I want us to look at say a middle company coming to co-opt this framework. if you could walk us through some basic steps or some things to follow through in that regard. Yeah.
So, sorry, just to clarify the question, like if a company was kind of coming to this for the first time, like
Yes.
yeah, yeah. So, I'd say that there are a couple of things. One is to first look at the commitments and say, do these commitments make sense for us? Can we do we already, sort of think about safety when it comes to how we develop our products, how we develop our terms of service, our community guidelines, and how we enforce those, improve those, and be transparent with others about them. If yes, then you can look uh, at the best practices themselves and start to ask, do we do these things?
Mhm.
And is there something that we do that matches up with this? And we actually have in one of the appendices of the framework a question bank, which is really just a set of questions that can be used to have structured conversations within a company about whether how they are implementing these kinds of practices and commitments. And that's really the first step to implementing the framework in a lot of ways. And a company could fully implement the assessment framework to the level of almost doing an audit of their trust and safety practices. But you don't have to start there, especially if you're say a startup, a smaller company. You're just really getting underway with online safety. Use those questions to have a conversation with your colleagues, and then from there figure out, okay, how do we either improve the practices that we're using? Do we need to implement new practices? And how can we improve these, and how can we advocate for the resources to invest in safety and things like that? And we have a number of resources we've developed for members of DTSP to assist with that, including like a rapid readiness survey that allows to quickly figure out, hey, do we think we do these practices? Do we think we do them well? Do we think we need to improve? And then how do we create a roadmap to go forward?
Thank you for that. I was really looking forward to a question about AI, and here we have one.
Yeah.
So this is from Rahul. I guess I pronounced the name well. He says, "What do you think are the possibilities for widespread adaptation of the framework, especially with the growth of AI? Do we look at smaller improvements of the framework, or will AI call for revamp to suit better?"
So this is a great question. Thank you, Rahul. So we've been thinking a lot about this and AI within the DTSP, partly because AI and automation more broadly have, uh, for a very long time, been a key part of trust and safety. So long before ChatGPT and the rise of LLMs and generative AI, machine learning classifiers have been a part of how companies detect content that violates their content policies and how they enforce those policies. Um, we decided last year in 2024, given the rise of generative AI and its relevance to trust and safety, that while many folks, quite rightly so, were focused on what are the risks posed by AI for online safety, that there was also a need to focus on how AI is being used as part of trust and safety. And so we created a working group and published a report on this back in September of last year. It's on our website. I can drop a link in the chat to that. But that basically looks at uses of AI as well as opportunities for the use of generative AI to implement all the different practices in our framework. That report looks at, yeah, I think we identified maybe 35, no, I can't remember, quite a few use cases for AI, as well as challenges, opportunities, best practices, ways of addressing limitations. Um, Ultimately, I think our framework is technologically neutral. It says that you use a combination of people, process, and technology to deliver on those commitments to trust and safety. But AI and is only going to be more a part of that in the future. And I think this is this is a key use case for AI being deployed as part of trust and safety. Um, that said, there are also international standards for AI that have been developed, especially through JTC1 has a subcommittee on AI. And so it's important to think about how safety standards and AI standards interoperate and work together. But I think we don't need to revamp because I think our framework was built with the idea in mind that AI was going to continue to be a part of this, but it is one where we can evolve and make sure we're capturing like what does best practice look like, even as that changes very rapidly.
Okay. Thank you, Dave. It's really been a very informative session to understand the SAFE framework and to help us continue to have a safe internet environment. In closing, I'd want to ask you this personal question of the future vision. If we were to meet again in 5 years, what would success look like for SAFE framework? What would have changed in the online safety ecosystem? I mean, from your point of view.
So here's a few things, and I would hope we can meet in the future again sooner than 5 years,
Yes,
and
sure.
perhaps in Ghana or elsewhere around the world. I was in Ghana, I think it was about 5 years ago, so I'm overdue to come back. But
Okay.
what I would say is that one, so we have an international standard. Um, One thing that we are working on right now, and welcome folks who want to work with us on this, is localizing that international standard. The standard is currently only available in English. That is not good enough. And the way that international standards become translated into other languages is they are adopted as national standards by different countries around the world. So I would hope to see in 5 years that dozens of countries around the world have adopted ISO IEC 25389 as national standards, translated into many languages, and being used by companies at all different sizes, as well as recognized by regulators. And I would also hope that we have both um, uh, deeper standards and a broader set of standards. So when I say deeper standards, I mean that one, we could have, perhaps the standard does evolve to have requirements that can be certified as compliant, and we can have agreement on more specifics around things like the controls that are used to address risks that are captured in the standard. Two, we can have standards on specific best practices. So, for example, one of our best practices in the enforcement commitment is around the well-being of people who are reviewing content online. We know that that is a job where you have to encounter a lot of very difficult and disturbing content that can take a toll on mental health and well-being. There are evidence-based best practices for how to improve the well-being of people who have to review that kind of content, and we could create a standard that is more specific, more detail about that. And lastly, broader standards, we have a glossary of trust and safety terminology that DTSP developed and published 2 years ago. I'm just going to drop a link to that in the chat here. And hopefully, we would like to take that glossary and transpose that as an international standard as well, to really get agreement on the terms that are core to doing this kind of work. So as we take forward the plans for that glossary, again, we will be doing a lot of consultation with stakeholders. And so hopefully 5 years from now, that glossary will also be a standard, and it will include content that you and others have provided, so we can talk about why those terms are helping to make the internet safer for people all around the world.
Okay, great. With what you just said, actually, there was one question about how would someone join your team, or if someone wants to join the team, what is the opportunity out there for someone to join the team? And then another one just dropped in: how would the youth or the younger generation take advantage of this program?
So for opportunities with our team, we're a very small team, and so we don't have opportunities come along too often, but hopefully as more companies join the partnership and we grow, we will be able to grow our team. I would like to have people working with me to help grow the standard, on all continents, all time zones, all around the world. And I will we will, post those on our website, or you can also follow DTSP through our LinkedIn page, as well as our mailing list. You can sign up for at dtspartnership.org to stay aware of those kinds of opportunities. For the youth and the younger generation there, I would just say, one of the things that we're seeing that's a really good example of the kinds of best practices that we are pushing for. I mentioned before, as an example of a best practice, right, is having user input into your content policies. And one of the ways that some companies are doing that right now is creating youth councils, youth advisory organizations, and those kinds of structures to allow really good input from young people to help companies figure out how are they using the services and how can they better design the services to help younger people. And those are exactly the kinds of practices we like to see. So I think we'll see more of that in the future. That's exactly the kind of practice we want to promote.
Okay, lastly, Dave, if someone wants to connect with you by means of handle, a social media handle,
yes. I'll just drop my LinkedIn profile in the chat here, and you're welcome to connect with me. That's probably the best place to start. You can also find me on Blue Sky and a few other places, but LinkedIn is the best way to go. So,
okay. Thank you so much, David, for an insightful and timely presentation. And discussion. It was great to walk us through the SAFE framework, but the broader role of that international standards can play in shaping our internet to have a safe and more trustworthy digital environment. So to everyone who joined us today, we appreciate you so much. Let's see the rounds of applause flowing digital hands of applause flowing. Thank you to everyone. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. And the conversation around online safety is not one that ends in a single session like this. So
certainly not.
So we invite you to stay connected with the online safety SIG. Gosway shared our various handles and how to join us. So please make sure you click on all those links, and then you are always welcome. As we continue to explore solutions that respect both user protection and an open, global, accessible internet for all. So on behalf of the organizing team, and also to Godsway, please help me with the name of the lady who connected us to David.
Present.
Yeah, Petan, yeah.
Farzana, yes.
Petan, we're really
yeah.
grateful. We're really grateful for how you have been helping us behind the scene and every other person who have made this possible. We really, really are grateful. And so stay safe, stay curious, and we look forward to seeing you in our next session. Have a great day, everyone. Until
Thank you so
then,
much.
thank you, Dave.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.